Hello, this is DC Hammer. Today on the DC Hammer Show, we continue to twist the tail of the Red Dragon, taking a deep dive into the Hudson Institute report, the Chinese Communist Party's foreign interference operations, how the U.S. and other democracies should respond. So buckle up. What the Jones, Perello, Plesner, and Belinda Lee report reveals, well, is quite revealing. Hang on. The report begins with an interesting historical perspective, quoting President George Washington's farewell address in 1796 as he stated, "History and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government." Oh, George, you are a sage of epic proportion. Even though this report is on China, goes into Russia's interference and election meddling, the fact that it dominated the headlines in Washington, D.C., and goes on then to reveal the truth that beneath the radar, it's actually the Communist Chinese that have put enormous resources into influence abroad. How about $10 billion a year? Doesn't that dwarf the few $1,000 and a handful of hackers that were dedicated by the Russians in order to quote-unquote meddle in American politics during the election cycle of 2016? Compare that to the Chinese spending $10 billion a year. Wait a minute. The mainstream press, wait a second, they've got to have reported this somewhere. Hang on. Let me hit a few clicks. Nope, not in there at all, so we'll have to do it for you. And as previously reported on the DC Hammer Show, the People's Republic of China, otherwise known as Communist China, the Red Dragon, all of those are synonymous, they have a quote-unquote distinctive system that blurs the lines between classical espionage, clandestine operations, and influence seeking. Right, Dinosaur Dianne Feinstein? The Red Chinese have perfected the art of co-opting covert operations, corruption, and coercion into a toxic blend that they call the 3 C's. Of course, if you watch Chinese television, if you happen to be hanging out in Red China and you turn on the little box in your room right next to where the microphone is, where they're picking up everything you say, China Global Television Network, or Confucius Institutes, love to use the word influence. Sounds better than interference, sounds better than collusion, sounds better than meddling, doesn't it? It's kind of all the same, but don't let that confuse you. If you watch CNN, MSNBC, et al., the Marxist screaming media, they're dead set on Russia, Russia, Russia. They're not going to hear a word about China, China, China. And the goal of what the Red Dragon is after is not just to influence, corrupt, and to abuse people abroad, nations abroad. It is also primarily focused on quelling, that's a nice word, isn't it? As in crushing internal dissent. And let's see, negative voices, wouldn't that be like criticism of state practices at home and abroad? And believe it or not, hang on, they target prominent politicians and business people, academics, students, and even the American public. And not just the American public, the Communist Chinese, the Red Dragon, has taken action against different countries all over the world, including New Zealand, where a former Chinese army spy trainer is now serving in the New Zealand parliament. But again, you just have to take the Red Dragon at his word. They're saying that he just taught English to the members of the Chinese army. He wasn't actually getting ready to spy on another country. And then in Australia, you have a Chinese advocate working to push the party line, that would be the Red Dragon, the Communist Chinese party line, on the South China Sea. And of course, it's easy to influence academics since they are already aligned with the communist takeover of the world and doing whatever they can in every country in which they reside, which is every country, in order to do whatever they can to proliferate the Chinese communist model. And in the United States, that influence and interference operation has been aimed at politicians, business people, academia, the media forever. and the Chinese diaspora communities, as in the Chinese living amongst us, and many of them being co-opted by Western culture and perfectly willing to adapt to their new culture. Others probably here just on a temporary basis, gathering intel, getting ready for the invasion. And then, of course, there's the United Front, organizations posing as non-government organizations embedded within the Chinese diaspora communities, raising fundamental questions about how much influence to allow China's state-controlled system and companies in the United States. Well, I would say none. How about you? But one of the main attacks is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, uses academia in the schools in order to spread their communist poison around the world. How do they do that? Well, they are growing the next generation of new communists. And how do they do that? Easy. They have the influence of Hollywood and again academia. So anywhere you go in the United States in our schools, there's bound to be communist sympathizers, and those specifically pushing the Chinese communist model, because again, that was the model that the deep state was using in order for the entire world to fall under the domination of the Red Dragon. Citizens of Chinese origin today are globally taking part in many democracies. Almost 5 million Chinese Americans, they've made their choice on citizenship. And of course, the Red Dragon never gives up its children. And so the United Front, in its logic, views Chinese overseas as but sons and daughters, part of the Communist Chinese Party's extended family. So as the Communist Chinese Party, the Red Dragon, continues to influence, strike and target vulnerabilities, operate within all Western democracies from Australia to New Zealand to the United States to Canada in ways that enable them to take advantage of cash-strapped Western media, to influence them through making them subsidiaries of the Communist Chinese propaganda system? Is that possible? Of course, the assumptions being made when you have a thriving democracy like the United States involved with a communist Chinese state, you would think that association would lead to that communist state becoming more liberal and even more democratic. Why, that's the mantra of dinosaur Dianne Feinstein that she's been pushing for 40 years, that China is actually improving. The Red Dragon is becoming more benevolent, that cozying up to the dragon only means a win-win for everyone. Well, maybe it's a win for Diane, a win for her husband, and a win for communist China, but I don't see much of a win there for the American people. But don't say that to Dianne Feinstein, because she's very sensitive about that. So in further episodes, we'll go deeper into this report. This is but an overview of the details. This doesn't shed light on the details themselves. So from a National Security Council perspective, to a look through how Congress should mandate a yearly report on these issues, the views of China scholars and journalists, we need to strengthen our defenses, work together in order to, number one, understand what the Red Dragon is doing. Number two, then, if it's nefarious, to figure out ways to defeat what the Red Dragon is trying to do. And thirdly, and most importantly, to keep everything in the perspective of what's good for America. Because you can't make America great again if China is trying to make America a subsidiary of the Communist Chinese regime. So as the introduction to this report concludes, in the end, transparency and legislation can only go so far. Democracy is kept alive by citizens operating in a democratic fashion and well-functioning institutions. The citizens of the United States or the citizens of any other democratic nation need to be personally invested in order to safeguard their democratic traditions rather than selling out. Dinosaur Diane, this is a memo to Dinosaur Diane. Please stop selling out. This is the genuine long-term inoculation against the challenge from authoritarian interference and influence. So stay tuned for further episodes of the enlightening, the opening of the cave of the Red Dragon. And now the DC Hammer Show is available as a podcast on Podcast Garden or iTunes. Just search for DC Hammer or News Network Analysis Associates. God bless.